Why use the arts and creativity to engage communities? Why bother engaging communities at all? People are awkward, gnarly, contrary individuals who rarely want the same thing. It's like herding wolves, great big feisty wolves, and maybe some beautiful songbirds, and then perhaps some badgers, some stout and snorty badgers, and some butterflies, and then maybe some scorpions, and check in a few dolphins, and then let's herd them all into a small dark room and lock the door in the hope that they'll all learn to get on with each other. Yeah, it would be anarchy. We're all so different. Maybe, in order to avoid complete societal meltdown, we should all just disconnect from each other and languish in our own individual, private, judgmental hells. Only I read 1984 and George Orwell had a different idea about this sort of thing, because it turns out disengaging people from each other is a particularly useful form of social control used by superstate omnipresent governments and probably also megalomaniac dictators. So I figure we need to avoid that. I'd like to share some personal history here to frame this narrative and explain why I truly believe the arts and creativity are integral to our community's survival, and why perhaps anarchy isn't such a bad thing. I was completely disengaged with school. I hated everything about it: structure, authority, didactic lessons, the feeling that I was expected to jump through hoops in order to gain the approval of people that I really didn't care about, or that I was expected to work like a robot in order to attain a future that I didn't even know that I wanted. In addition, I had a bit of a chaotic home life, so there was nobody there to really step in and support the situation. The result was a hugely argumentative, disengaged and self-destructive young woman who had the capability of doing well in life, but who was rapidly going the other way. Forward a few years, and I'm a 20-year-old single mother, signing on the dole, living in a flat in Wrexham. Yeah, I fitted like every stereotype. So that the woman who sneered down her nose in disgust that her taxes had to pay for me and my child to live, well, she felt totally justified in her judgment of me. I tried college, I dropped out. I just couldn't engage. I had such an anger here, you know, at myself, at the system, at my family, at society, at anybody who might try and help. So when I see women plastered across the front page of newspapers, and they're in a little outfit, and they're really drunk, and they're asleep on a park bench or in the gutter, or they're fighting, I want to reach out and hug that woman, because I was that woman. I still am that woman. I just don't behave that way. Nobody behaves that way when they're happy. And it was my daughter, Rhiannon, who held me together at that time. You see, I knew things weren't right, but I didn't know how to change. I lacked the creativity, the imagination to envisage my life differently. But the problem was that I didn't even know that I lacked these tools. And so I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't know how to ask for help. I couldn't even imagine what asking for help might look like. The imagination was a hard, compressed slate, a blank slate, but cold. Fast forward another 8 years, and I'm still a single parent. I'm now quitting a lucrative career as a field sales executive in media, selling my house, to fund a degree in English literature and creative writing. I was going to teach. My mother used to work in sales, and my father is a retired teacher, so that's how far the imagination stretched. But during this time, 3 things happened. The first was that I discovered a love for poetry. I read the words of William Blake and P.B. Shelley, and I thought, I understand this, I get this, this means something to me, I can interact with this. And as cheesy as this may sound, I genuinely felt like those writers reached out across time and space with their words. and spoke to me. I'd never had that before. Secondly, I volunteered on the Raising Aspirations programme, where I was trained to facilitate a series of 8 creative workshops with young people, so year 7s in high schools, who perhaps had the capability to go to university, but maybe for whatever reason, family circumstances, they may never consider applying to university themselves. And this is where I first experienced what could be achieved with a small group of people working on one project using creativity as a focus. So these first 2 things, poetry and experiencing firsthand the transformative potential of creative participatory practice, sparked my imagination. So this is it now. I could start to imagine, and this is what I knew I would do. This is what I knew I had to, this would be how I would work. I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I knew that this was going to be my life. There's a quote that I've since discovered by the mystical poet, the 13th century mystical poet and Islamic scholar Rumi, love. And I love a lot of his work, but this particular quote stays with me. And it goes, "Constant, slow movement teaches us to keep working like a small creek that remains clear, that doesn't stagnate, but finds its way through numerous details deliberately." The third thing that happened was I discovered the works of Karl Marx. His theory of alienation was a beacon to me. So my rough interpretation, or the way that I interpreted what I read, would be to say that I, Sophie McKeand, am an autonomous sentient being. Given complete control over my life, I would not choose to go and work in a call centre. If my economic circumstances dictate that I have to go and work in a call centre, every hour that I spend in that call centre, which is doing work that isn't an integral part of my soul, of who I am, it begins to alienate me from myself, and there's a disconnect happens. And because I'm no longer fully in tune with myself, I begin to become alienated from, I go home and I'm alienated from my partner, from my extended family, from my community. And all of these people around me are also undergoing their own process of alienation because of the system that I've just explained. I was researching something else at the time. Marx wasn't actually even part of the course, but this idea stuck with me. It resonated with me. I kept thinking about it over and over, rolling it in my mouth, in my hands, in my mind like a precious stone. And I realized that I found the right information at the right time for me. And that was really important. Marx wasn't part of my course, but I found that information and it resonated with me because it was the right time for me to find it. And I've since discovered that this is called self-directed learning. So then I had my 3 things. So finding a way to counteract alienation became part of the goal. I wanted to create a life that I was fully engaged with, where there was no separation between Sophie, the person, and Sophie, the worker. And I knew that poetry and participatory, creative working in small groups, probably outside of the school curriculum to be fair, would be the key. Oddly enough, this epiphany meant nothing to anybody else. I am a poet. I want to counteract alienation through poetry and participatory community projects, I would shout. And yeah, people were not that interested. I mean, that's fair enough. There is a lot of hot air out here in the poetry world, you know? So I had to rethink. It's not enough that I had this revelation, and it's no good trying to tell people my revelation. I had to live it. I had to dedicate every day of my life to it. When I speak to people now, they're still quite amazed that I make a full-time, it's a modest, but it's a full-time living from being a poet. Because I'm not particularly famous in the way like Carol Ann Duffy or Gillian Clark. Definitely not in that league. I like, as an aside, is it Gary Snyder who said we should aim to be famous for 15 miles? Love that. It's another mantra of mine. So, yeah, people are still quite amazed that I make a living out of being a poet which actually reminds me of a Chinese proverb, which I love, which is the person saying it cannot be done should not interrupt the person doing it. Being a socially engaged artist sounds pretty exciting, or at least it does to me. I mean, that might not be your thing, but it's my thing. But there were so many hurdles to overcome. Mainly revelations about my approach to working with people and how we work together. I had to face a number of uncomfortable truths about my attitude. You see, my childhood was a battleground, and I was taking that into my adult life and into my working practices. I didn't realise that's what I was doing, but I was always armed to the teeth for a good row and alienating a lot of people in the process. So this new path that I was hacking away through, it wasn't just about learning to pass an exam or to do a job well. The role I was carving out meant travelling a turbulent journey of self-discovery. But I began to better understand myself through self-direction, through failing again, and then having some tiny successes so that the learning process had a deeper personal meaning to me than any diploma or salary increase. Forward again to 2016. I turned 40 this year. Today is my first day as the Young People's Laureate for Wales. Yeah. I'm deeply honoured to be able to use this role to engage young people across our beautiful country through poetry, spoken word and literature. I'm also learning to embrace anarchy. I'm going to say it, anarchy. I want to quote Chomsky here. Hang on, I've got a quote. Very neatly written on the back of an envelope. So Chomsky says, "It's not at all the general image described." And the interviewer had said, "It's disenfranchised punks throwing rocks at store windows, or masked men tossing bombs at fat industrialists." And Chomsky said, "No. Anarchy is a concept of a very organised society, but organised from below by direct participation at every level, with as little control and dominion as is feasible, maybe none." The natural world is beautifully anarchic. The hawk, the wolf, the dolphin, the butterfly are anarchists. A murmuration of starlings is anarchy in its purest form. And we are also part of this ecosystem, this unplanned plan. How do we even find our way back to that? I hope Orwell won't mind if I slightly misquote him here and say, if there is hope, it lies in the children. Ken Robinson's inspirational TED Talks explain eloquently the huge failings of our current education system, in that it is tied to an industrial model of teaching that churns out too many adults who endure rather than enjoy their work and lives. I absolutely agree, and believe the most important thing that we can teach our children is anarchy, or creativity through self-directed learning. We have to relinquish control, which is scary. What if they do what we don't want them to do? But what if we take the wolf, the songbird, the butterfly, the scorpion, the badger, the dolphin, the monkey, and just set them free to create their own world? Will they really make a mess of it? Would they make more of a mess of it than we have? I doubt it. Through understanding ourselves, could we learn to have more faith in each other? Through understanding ourselves through our own creativity, could we learn to have more faith in each other? We are all uniquely gifted. We just need to find our individual gifts. This cannot be taught. But if we can support self-directed creativity, our children will devise ways of being in the world that we couldn't even dream. And they will be fulfilled in the process. To quote the Tao Te Ching, the teacher teaches without teaching. The most important engagement tool is us, is you. What you do is what you teach. Creativity is not an external pressure to be applied, but an internal door. And I believe that self-directed artistry is the key. The arts are sometimes sneered at by people who choose not to engage. Anybody could do that is sometimes bandied about. Yeah, but you didn't, did you? And actually, it's really hard to be creative. I read recently of an artist who said something along the lines of, in my imagination, I am constructing beautiful castles, but in reality, I'm cobbling together sheds. To produce any art, you have to really start being in the world, really taking notice of her. Colours, shapes, sounds, nothing can be taken for granted anymore. Emotional intelligence and empathy need to be engaged, along with a wealth of creative problem-solving techniques that will be unique to your specific project. I know educated, capable adults who could stand up here all day and give presentations, but ask them to write 5 lines of their own work of a poem and read it to a small group of their peers, and they are out the door. In order to engage with each other, we need to begin the practice of engaging ourselves every day, producing creative responses to our surroundings. It's not enough to put some artists on pedestals and simply devour their art. Recently, a friend posed the question, did art exist in Arcadia? I would argue that art did not exist in Arcadia. Art is Arcadia. Engaging communities begins with the self and ends with the self. We need to allow art and anarchy to flourish. Relinquish control. Give up changing the world. You are only a drop in the ocean. But what a great and powerful and beautiful ocean we are together. So I'd like to just finish with a poem, and it's called You. It is time to remember who you are, no less than the child of stars, no more than the space between atoms. When the snow tumbled white, we scrambled for warmth. The waters of the world stacked ice heavy and groaning. We emerge wolf grey, howling, where have you been? The food grows cold, drinks warm, conversation stale as we wait for you. Damp and heavy from the long hunt we circle. Into the night we weave our breath with clouds and howl your name. How is it that you cannot hear? The root of thought is the flow of heart, is the open doorway, is lightning brilliance. We circle like swans, patient and stoic, bark like feet break surface, paddle grit and slime. You think us elegant, we rasp and hiss. You dream us wild, we fight to be free. You think us royal, we bathe in dirt, drink pond water. Your heart beats with our wings. My air was polluted, negative charge, my lakes evaporate, I collapse into dust. We tracked the wrong path, stuttered over mountains, heard only the echo of our thoughts, the chatter of mouths. The sun embraced and abandoned us 10,000 times before we chased silence home with blistered feet, with dry mouths and wind-ravaged faces, skin creased like valleys. Now the heather is plum purple, water slides into rock, the hair beats the ground, but you are dying. Light extinguished, you shiver in shadows and complain. White swans illuminate your seeping heart so that you chase them away, scream darkness and forget. We must plant rocks to remember, one tree at a time to rewild. Do not idle, wolf circle, your heart beats with our wings. It is time to remember who you are, no less than the child of stars, no more than the space between atoms. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.